In every corner of the world, there are secrets, stories that exist beyond understanding. Tonight, we uncover three terrifying haunted tales: the forgotten missile silo, the abandoned oil rig, the forgotten naval dockyard. This is episode 156 of Dynamic Dark. Put on your headphones and let the fear begin. Today's first story is the forgotten missile silo. Deep inside a remote mountain range, an abandoned underground missile silo had remained sealed for more than 30 years. Official military records claimed the base had been permanently shut down after a classified emergency, but no one ever revealed what had actually happened there. Every soldier assigned to the facility disappeared without a trace, and the entire location was erased from public records. Locals believed the mountain itself was cursed, and no one dared to go near the massive blast doors hidden beneath the rocks. Curious to uncover the truth, Ethan, Ryan, and Chloe traveled for hours until they finally discovered the forgotten military entrance. The gigantic steel blast door was covered in rust, yet it was already slightly open, as if someone had entered recently. As they stepped inside with powerful flashlights, a freezing cold wind echoed through the endless concrete tunnels. Emergency lights flickered weakly above them, while faded military warning signs covered the walls. Somewhere deep inside the bunker, a heavy metallic sound echoed through the darkness, as if an old machine had suddenly come back to life. The deeper they walked, the quieter everything became. The only sounds were their footsteps and the distant metallic echoes coming from somewhere beneath the bunker. Without realizing it, the three explorers had just entered a place where no visitor had ever returned alive. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Long concrete tunnels stretched endlessly beneath the mountain while faded military warning signs covered the walls. Every footstep echoed through the silent bunker as Ethan, Ryan, and Chloe continued moving deeper underground. Eventually, they reached the abandoned control room. Inside, dozens of old military computers stood frozen in time, their cracked monitors covered in dust as if no one had touched them for decades. Dead soldiers still sat in their chairs, while skeletons lay beside broken control consoles. Empty bullet casings covered the floor. Military radios had been smashed apart, classified files were scattered everywhere, and several concrete walls were covered with deep scratch marks. Some chairs had been knocked over, but strangely, there were no signs of an explosion or any major firefight inside the bunker. The strangest part was that none of the soldiers appeared to have died from gunfire. Their weapons were still lying beside them, untouched, as though they had never even fired a single shot. It looked as though something had entered the bunker, and every soldier had fallen exactly where they stood. As the three explorers looked around the silent control room, they suddenly heard the faint sound of heavy machinery echoing from somewhere far below the underground base. Ryan searched through the classified documents, while Chloe inspected an old military recorder. Most of the files had been burned or torn apart, but one page still remained readable beneath a pile of dust. Ethan carefully picked it up and began reading the faded report. According to the document, the soldiers had reported seeing unknown 7-foot-tall black figures moving silently through the underground tunnels just hours before all communication with the base was lost. Every emergency exit had been sealed, and the entire bunker had been placed under complete lockdown. Curious, Chloe switched on the old military recorder. At first, only loud static filled the room. Then the voices of frightened soldiers suddenly echoed through the damaged speaker. They repeatedly shouted that something had entered the missile silo and was moving toward the control room. Seconds later, gunfire erupted, followed by screams and then complete silence. Just as the recording ended, the lights inside the control room suddenly flickered. A loud metallic alarm echoed through the bunker, and somewhere deep below them, the sound of massive machinery slowly began coming back to life. The missile silo was no longer abandoned. A gigantic blast door slowly opened, revealing the enormous missile launch chamber hidden deep beneath the mounting. In the center of the chamber stood a massive ballistic missile, still perfectly upright after decades of abandonment. Dust filled the air as old floodlights flickered weakly across the enormous underground structure. Around the missile's launch platform lay even more dead soldiers, many still gripping their rifles as if they had been preparing for one final battle. The entire chamber looked untouched, as though time had completely stopped the moment the base was abandoned. Ethan, Ryan, and Chloe carefully stepped onto the metal platform, scanning every corner with their flashlights. The silence inside the chamber felt unnatural. There were no footsteps, no voices, not even the sound of the wind. Only the distant humming of old military machinery echoed through the darkness. Then Chloe suddenly looked up. Standing silently across the upper steel catwalks were 5 tall black featureless ghosts. None of them moved. None of them reacted. None of them made a sound. They simply stood there, watching the 3 explorers from the darkness above, as though they had been waiting for someone to enter the missile silo. The 3 explorers rushed back toward the control room, hoping to find another exit before the bunker completely sealed itself. As soon as they entered, every computer suddenly powered on. Red emergency lights flooded the bunker while warning sirens echoed through every tunnel. The silent control room instantly transformed into a fully active military command center. Missile launch sequence initiated. One by one, dusty monitors came back to life. Radar screens lit up, warning messages flashed across every display, and old control panels activated after decades of silence. Standing around the launch console were 7 tall black featureless ghosts. They surrounded the control panels in complete silence. None of them looked at the explorers. None of them made a sound. Without speaking, one of them slowly extended its long black arm toward the launch controls. The countdown immediately appeared across every screen. 10, 9, 8. The entire bunker began shaking violently. Dust fell from the ceiling as the sound of the missile fueling system echoed through the underground base. Ethan, Ryan, and Chloe stood frozen in disbelief. They had finally discovered why the missile silo had never been truly abandoned. Someone was still carrying out the launch sequence. Realizing they could do nothing to stop the launch, Ethan, Ryan, and Chloe sprinted through the emergency tunnel leading outside the mounting. Their footsteps echoed behind them as warning sirens continued shaking the underground bunker. Seconds after reaching their jeep, they drove away as fast as they could. Suddenly, the entire mountain began trembling. Behind them, a deafening explosion echoed through the valley as the massive missile blasted into the night sky, disappearing into the dark clouds above. Believing they had finally escaped, Ryan slowed the vehicle and took a deep breath. For a brief moment, complete silence filled the jeep. Then, without warning, the old military radio they had unknowingly taken from the bunker suddenly switched on by itself. A burst of cold static filled the vehicle before a single distorted transmission echoed through the speaker. Launch successful. At that exact moment, Ethan looked into the rear-view mirror. Standing silently across the mountain road behind them were 10 tall black featureless ghosts, tall black silhouettes. None of them moved. None of them chased the jeep. They simply stood there in complete silence, watching the explorers disappear into the darkness. As though their mission had finally been completed. Today's second story is the abandoned oil rig. Far away from the coastline, surrounded by endless dark waters, an abandoned offshore oil rig had remained completely deserted for more than 20 years. Official reports claimed that a mysterious accident forced the entire crew to evacuate overnight, but no rescue team ever found a single survivor. The investigation was immediately classified, and every record related to the disaster mysteriously disappeared. Since then, fishermen had reported strange lights and metallic noises coming from the abandoned platform, yet no one ever dared to investigate. Years later, 3 young explorers, Noah, Logan, and Mason, traveled deep into the ocean to uncover the truth behind the forgotten oil rig. As their helicopter landed on the rust-covered platform, the sound of its spinning blades slowly faded into complete silence. A thick layer of ocean fog covered the entire structure, while the enormous drilling tower disappeared into the darkness. Rusted pipelines stretched across the platform, and old industrial machines produced strange metallic sounds, even though the facility had supposedly been abandoned for decades. Carrying powerful flashlights, the 3 explorers carefully stepped inside the massive oil rig. Every metal staircase echoed beneath their feet as freezing sea winds passed through the empty structure. Somewhere deep below the platform, the faint sound of heavy drilling machinery echoed through the darkness. None of them realized that the operation inside the oil rig had never truly stopped. Inside the rig, everything looked frozen in time. Rust covered the narrow metal corridors, while broken control panels filled the abandoned rooms. Old drilling equipment was scattered everywhere, and the sound of 3 explorers' footsteps echoed through the empty metal walkways. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became, broken only by the distant sound of machinery somewhere far below the platform. As they explored deeper into the oil rig, they discovered the remains of the missing crew. Dead workers were lying near the massive engine rooms, while skeletons were found inside the main control center. Broken radios, damaged security cameras, torn maintenance logs, and old drilling records were scattered across the floors. Several walls were covered with strange marks, yet there were no signs of an explosion or a struggle. But something felt terribly wrong. The workers had not died while trying to escape. They died while they were still working. Their tools were still in their hands, and their final records showed that they were following the same order until the very end. On one old drilling log, only one message remained. The drilling must continue. The explorers followed the sound of a machine running somewhere deep below the main deck. Their footsteps echoed through the narrow metal stairways as they descended further into the abandoned oil rig. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, and a thick layer of ocean fog slowly covered the lower levels of the structure. At the bottom drilling level, they discovered something impossible. The massive drilling machine was still operating after more than 20 years of abandonment. Old warning lights flickered across the control panels, heavy mechanical sounds filled the chamber, and the entire platform shook with every movement of the giant drill. But they were not alone. Through the thick fog surrounding the machinery, one of the explorers noticed a dark figure standing silently beside the drilling equipment. A 7-foot-tall black featureless ghost. It stood completely still near the massive drill, watching the operation in silence. The air around the chamber suddenly became freezing cold. Before anyone could move closer or understand what they were seeing, the figure slowly disappeared into the dense fog, leaving behind only the sound of the drilling machine continuing to operate. The explorers reached the main drilling platform and stopped in fear. The entire area was covered in thick white ocean fog. The massive drilling structure disappeared into the darkness, while the sound of heavy machinery echoed through the platform. Rusted metal walkways stretched across the rig, and old warning lights flickered above the endless industrial equipment. As they looked through the fog, they noticed something standing across the metal walkways and upper platforms. 5 tall black featureless ghosts. They stood completely still, watching the operation around them. But something was different. They were not chasing the explorers. They were not attacking. They were working. One stood near the drilling controls, operating the old machinery. Another stood beside the damaged equipment, continuing maintenance work. The others moved silently across the platforms, keeping the abandoned oil rig alive. The explorers slowly realized the impossible truth. The oil rig was still running. After 20 years of abandonment, something had been continuing the operation, and the drilling had never stopped. The explorers rushed back to the control room, searching for a way to shut down the oil rig's systems. The deeper they moved through the corridors, the louder the machinery became. But the moment they entered the control room, every monitor suddenly powered on by itself. Red emergency lights filled the room as warning alarms echoed across the abandoned platform. Standing around the control panels were 7 tall black featureless ghosts. They surrounded the old machines in complete silence, operating the controls as if they had been managing the oil rig for decades. They did not react to the explorers. They simply continued their work. Then, the security footage appeared on the massive screens. The explorers watched the final moments of the missing crew. The recording showed workers desperately trying to continue the drilling operation before suddenly collapsing one by one inside the rig. But moments later, their dead bodies slowly stood back up. They returned to their stations, picked up their tools, and walked back toward the drilling floor. The impossible truth became clear. The workers were never meant to escape. They had been brought back to continue the drilling forever. The explorers ran toward the helicopter as the storm grew stronger around the abandoned oil rig. Powerful waves crashed against the metal structure, while the entire platform shook beneath the force of the ocean. Before escaping, they looked back one last time. What they saw was impossible. The entire oil rig was alive. Across the massive structure, 10 tall black featureless ghosts stood silently, controlling every part of the operation. Some managed the control systems, while others continued maintaining the old machinery. Below them, the dead workers moved through the drilling levels, repairing damaged equipment, operating machines, and continuing their endless work. The explorers finally understood the terrifying truth. The oil rig was never abandoned. The accident did not end the mission. It only changed the workers. As the helicopter disappeared into the storm, the massive drilling machine suddenly reached its final depth beneath the ocean floor. Then, something moved in the darkness below the water. Inside the helicopter, the old radio suddenly turned on by itself. A burst of static filled the cabin. A cold voice whispered, "Drilling complete." Today's last story is The Forgotten Naval War. Hidden far away from civilization, an abandoned naval base had remained untouched for decades. The base was once the most powerful naval station in the region, but after a mysterious sea battle against the fictional rival nation Veyron, the entire facility was suddenly shut down. No official explanation was ever given. Years later, 3 explorers, Emma, Sophie, and Olivia, arrived at the forgotten naval dockyard to uncover what had really happened. As they stepped inside the enormous abandoned base, endless rows of rusted warships filled the silent harbor. Broken radar towers stood frozen in time, while thick sea fog drifted slowly across the empty docks. Old naval cranes creaked in the cold wind, and abandoned submarines rested beneath the dark water. The deeper they walked into the forgotten harbor, the stranger everything became. Despite decades of abandonment, every warship looked perfectly ready for battle. Inside the abandoned naval base, the deeper the explorers went, the more it looked like the battle had ended only yesterday. Destroyed command rooms lined the corridors. Broken communication systems still covered the walls. Classified military files were scattered across the floors, soaked by years of sea air. Everywhere they looked, the remains of Navy soldiers were still there. Skeletons sat inside radar stations. Dead officers remained at their command consoles. Others were still gripping old radios, as if they had never left their posts. Then, one of the ancient military radios suddenly filled the silent base with loud bursts of static. A cold transmission echoed through every corridor. Enemy fleet approaching. Prepare for combat. The message repeated again, and again, and again. The explorers searched the dark harbor through the thick sea fog. The ocean was completely silent. There were no ships, no lights, no enemy. At least, not yet. Following the mysterious radio signal, the explorers reached the center of the abandoned naval harbor. The entire dockyard remained silent. Until suddenly, a deep metallic horn echoed across the ocean. One by one, the engines of the abandoned warships rumbled back to life after decades of silence. Radar towers slowly began rotating. Navigation lights flickered across the harbor. Ancient control panels lit up inside the ships. Then, far beneath the dark water, something enormous moved below the surface. The explorers froze. Through the thick sea fog, standing alone on the deck of the largest warship, was a 7-foot-tall black featureless ghost. Its body was completely made black. No face, no eyes, no mouth. It stood silently beside the ship's navigation controls. Without making a single movement, the entire warship suddenly lit up. Power surged through the vessel, and the black figure simply disappeared into the fog. The explorers followed the slowly moving warships deeper into the abandoned naval base. What they discovered should have been impossible. Across the dockyard, 5 tall black featureless ghosts stood silently at different military stations. One stood beside the navigation controls of the largest warship. Another remained inside the radar command room as the giant radar continued scanning the dark ocean. The others silently operated abandoned communication systems, weapons controls, and military equipment that should have stopped working decades ago. Then, the explorers noticed a massive steel door hidden beneath the harbor. It slowly opened. Below the naval base, an enormous underground submarine facility was still fully operational. Rows of abandoned submarines began powering on. Engines rumbled through the tunnels. Launch systems activated one by one. At that moment, the explorers finally understood the terrifying truth. This was never an abandoned naval base. It was a battlefield waiting for the war to begin again. The explorers rushed into the abandoned communication room, hoping to shut down the entire naval operation. But the moment the heavy steel door opened, they stopped. 7 tall black featureless ghosts stood silently around the old communication systems. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Each one continued operating the abandoned military equipment as if the war had never ended. Then, the explorers looked toward the center of the room. A lone captain's chair faced the massive command screens. Sitting in it was another tall black featureless ghost. The captain. It remained completely motionless while every warship, submarine, and radar system responded to its silent command. Without warning, the old military screens flickered to life. The explorers watched the forgotten battle unfold. Warships exploded. Soldiers fell. The entire naval base was destroyed. But moments after the last soldier died, every military system activated again. The mission never ended. The soldiers had died. But the fleet never stopped fighting. The explorers reached the shoreline and escaped the forgotten naval base. But before leaving, they looked back across the dark ocean. The entire naval fleet had awakened. Across the abandoned harbor, 10 tall black featureless ghosts stood silently aboard warships, submarines, radar towers, and command decks, controlling every part of the fleet. Below them, dead Navy soldiers had returned to their stations. Cannons thundered into the thick sea fog. Warships slowly advanced through the harbor. Deep beneath the waves, submarines disappeared into the darkness, beginning their silent patrol. At that moment, the explorers finally understood the terrifying truth. The naval base was never abandoned. The war never ended. The captain was still commanding his fleet, waiting for the next battle. As the explorers drove away from the coastline, their old military radio suddenly crackled to life. A cold burst of static echoed through the vehicle. Then a voice whispered, "Enemy fleet detected. Prepare for attack." This was episode 156 of Dynamic Dark. Which story ruined your night? Tell us in the comments. The most terrifying comment will be pinned. Episode 157 is coming. Indian horror large space Chudal stories are even darker and more cursed. Like, subscribe and press the bell icon. If you dare to step into the darkness again. Everyday new horror episode at 7:45 p.m. only on Dynamic Dark.